2024 regularly scheduled work session. Tonight, there are 2 items on the agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you're required to fill out a public comment card, and if you are speaking on behalf of an organization, you must fill out an affidavit that you have the authority of said organization. Please remember, this is not a time to engage the mayor or members of the city council in conversation. When your name is called, please come forward and speak into the microphone stating your name and address for the record. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Once the item is called, no other public cards will be accepted. Will the city clerk please sound agenda item A?
Mayor, that first item is the Milton Fire Cares update given by our Medical Services Officer, Mr. Mark Haskins.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, we appreciate your audience. Chief Ben Musa would have loved to come, but he's actually down at the state capitol. They had a bill considering EMS delivery down there, so he was looking at that. So I'm going to pull up this. And well, I may just have to talk you through it because it's not on here.
Look on the desktop and see if it's.
There we go.
There we go.
Now it's pulling up.
There you go.
Okay.
Easy peasy.
Oh yeah, you know, firemen are great with technology. So.
As long as you're good at putting out fires, we're good, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's the most important thing. So I'll flick it over here though.
Know your lane, as we would say.
Mhm.
All right, so this is the actual first full year that the CARES program has been in service. So it was a couple of weeks ago, I presented this PowerPoint to our fire senior staff, and our deputy city manager, Stacy, was there, and she thought, and Chief Ben Musa thought it'd be a good idea to share with you just some of the accomplishments of CARES over the last year. So we're just going to move through this and we'll talk about what CARES accomplished, but at the end, there's a few case studies. We're actually going to review what we did for 3 citizens, or not 3, 8 citizens. So you can kind of see sometimes by actually seeing what they do in a real life scenario, it kind of explains better what CARES actually is all about versus maybe just facts and figures. So when it comes to the priorities of this program though, it's pretty much 3. There's response, prevention, and education is what it kind of falls under. So we'll take each one of those at a time. When it comes to response, so what we worked out with CARES is it actually will respond to 911 calls when it's not responding maybe to wellness visits or taking care of different members of the community or teaching. So if there's not downtime, but maybe time when he's working on paperwork and a call comes out and Derek is close to it, he'll actually jump that call. So what that does, and the reason that he does that, is as you can see on the bottom slides there, there's a bar graph, and FEMA actually puts out a cost of what it costs to run a fire engine per hour, what it costs to run a rescue, which is our ambulance, per hour, and what it costs just to run like an F-150 per hour. And that, it takes into consideration maintenance, fuel, insurance, like all those different things. That's what FEMA would charge. So when Derek can respond to a call, and Derek Hoffman, he's our CARES program coordinator, so you'll hear me refer a lot to Derek today. He would have been here to present this, but he's actually teaching a CPR class this evening. He's doing his job. But when he jumps a call and is able to cancel the engine, an engine would cost around $175 to run a call for an hour. So he's able to do that on occasion. And the last quarter of 2023, we really focused in to see, we stationed him down at 44, so he would do his paperwork down there, and he was able to jump calls because that's the busiest station. So as he did that, he was able to cancel the engine about 40 times. He was able to cancel the rescue about 19 times. And that doesn't factor in the savings there, that about 10,000 in savings. It doesn't factor in pay, but it just factors in that FEMA schedule of what it would cost. So we're trying to find a value there, kind of a value add with that, with him running calls. And part of the reason he does that then is if he makes first contact with the patient and that patient is someone that needs to follow up on, he's building the relationship right from the very beginning. So that really helps out with that, because that's where we call them frequent flyers, but where the majority of those who maybe call 911 a lot, it falls down in that area of town. So he was able to do that, and his response time is just about 3 minutes. So it's even faster than an engine getting there. So that's one aspect of what he's doing, this CARES response. Prevention, and you're probably familiar with the fact that the CARES vehicle will go and visit citizens within the community, maybe try and bridge that gap between, an emergency call and them getting the definitive care that they need, or maybe they're released from the hospital and they need follow-up. They have questions about their medications or following through on doctor's orders. So what he does is he'll make those regular wellness visits on people. That's part of his prevention work. Another part of that prevention work is that he actually will stop on people that call 911 a lot. So they're those ones who call 911 more than once a month. He tries to make contact with them to prevent that down the road. And he's been able to actually slow down that multiple 911 response by about 66%. So as you see those two large bars there, there were some patients that were calling 911 about 34 times. It dropped it down to 11 after he made his interventions. So we're trying to reduce the strain on the system, but also if people aren't calling 911 all the time, that allows our fire engines to remain in service to respond to more critical calls, right? We want them responding to fires and to critical calls, not to maybe people slipping and falling or abusing the 911 system. So he actually performed 221 of those prevention and wellness visits. Some of these ones are not just frequent flyers, but he actually will call monthly on certain ones within the community. Maybe their family members are concerned about an elderly parent, an elderly relative. So he calls on these ones once a month, and he'll just do a basic assessment on them. He'll make sure that they're doing okay. He'll review their medication, with them to make sure that they're complying with all their doctor's orders. So this is kind of, it's a nice feature of that. And you'll see when we review some of the case studies, how the families really do appreciate that. And these home visits increased from about 160 up to 220 in his first full year on the job. So, and if you have any questions, just, chime in and ask me as we move through this.
Captain, when he's not working, is there a backup for him or is it just him solely?
It's just him right now. Yeah. So, obviously he coordinates his visits on days that he's on shift.
Yeah. And
then he performs those responses on the days that he's on shift. So the third aspect of what he does, besides response and then those wellness visits, prevention, is education. So he's kind of spearheading our public health education, teaching CPR to the community, teaching Stop the Bleed classes, fall prevention classes. So he taught 362 people during the calendar year within citizens within the community of these different health education topics. And that's up from 94 the year before. And the year before, 2022, we had the CARES program running, but it was staffed by part-timers, right? So then it was approved in the fall of 2022 to become a full-time position. And that's when Derek took over. So 2023, we're kind of comparing those two numbers of part-time to a full-time CARES medic.
And that seems like a huge jump. How does that compare to others? Are other cities putting forth the same effort to train the community?
Yes. Well, I mean, most communities have CPR training as part of their community risk reduction divisions. So Derek is taking that on for our community risk reduction division under Deputy Chief Fortner. So I don't know exactly, how many other classes others teach, but we've been trying to ramp that up now that we have someone that can devote time to it. That's why you see that big jump there. And we're probably going to see a bigger jump this year. We used to teach what was called CPR Saturdays, the first Saturday of the month. We had a standing class at 43 that any citizen that wanted to, they'd come in and take CPR. We're adjusting it this year to really kind of make it so that whenever it's convenient for the citizens, we'll schedule a class. So that might be evening, that might be Saturday, might be Sunday. So we're probably going to see that number jump. In fact, the class that's on today, it's a hybrid, part Zoom, part online class, and we have over 40 that signed up for that class. So we're hoping that that will just continue, because that's a good value for the citizens, and to get that training, it's
These
beneficial.
911 calls that you get, do they,
Yeah.
what kind of medical category do they fall into? What kind of calls are they
That Derek
handling?
responds to.
Yeah.
So he tries to focus in. We have 5 levels of medical calls. They're broken out by dispatch: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. So Echo is the most serious. That'd be like a cardiac arrest. Alpha and Bravo calls are less serious in nature. So maybe it's a slip and fall, something that's not life-threatening. So he tries to jump those calls because, why is somebody calling 911 if they just, slipped and fell and can't get back into the chair? Maybe there's underlying issues there that he can assist the family with, or maybe get them the resources that they need. So those are the ones he keys in on. And then if he has the opportunity, he'll join on other calls too, because he's a paramedic, and it's nice to have an extra set of hands. He has a higher level of medical training. So if he helps out on a cardiac arrest or a serious issue, that just helps the scene run smoother. So he's made a few new relationships this year. So he's been able to build out some partnerships. As you probably heard, he has a partnership with our local police department to respond to people who had called 911 due to a mental health crisis. So they go once a month together, a member of Milton PD and Derek, and they follow up on these ones to make sure they're getting all of the care and referrals that they need to receive definitive treatment if that's what they need. So that just started last month. So we're going to see how that continues, or a couple of months ago. We have a relationship with North Fulton Hospital. They give us referrals. As people get discharged from the hospital, maybe they realize this person lives alone. They're not going to be able to handle taking care of themselves or following doctor's orders. He'll help them out. We'll get those referrals. They also help us teach fall prevention classes. So that's a nice partnership with them. We have a partnership with North Fulton Senior Services. Derek, in fact, goes every month to the birdhouse there and does blood pressure checks and makes connections with the community there. Some of these are private entities right at home, TOPS. They provide services that obviously the public is not going to provide for free, but we need people to refer them to. Meals on Wheels. Alpharetta has a community paramedicine program too. So, we work together to share ideas, collaborate, make sure that we're providing the best services to each of our communities. And then Ridgeview is a psychiatric hospital. So we've been talking with them to be able to provide maybe referrals to definitive care at those facilities when needed. And these were the initiatives that we keyed in on last year. We talked about the wellness visits, visiting citizens about once a month is what we try and do. The mental health co-response, these fall prevention classes. North Fulton came out and taught one in each of our large nursing homes. So at Vitality and at the Phoenix, and that was well received. He'll teach CPR classes for the city, for the public. As I mentioned, he goes weekly to the senior center and provides blood pressure checks there, and then just, helps out with referrals at that point. Stop the Bleed classes. Pulse Point education, as you know, we started the Pulse Point program in the fall. So whenever we teach a CPR class, we educate the citizens on what Pulse Point is and the benefits of them getting the app and signing up to have more people alerted if there's a cardiac arrest in a public place. So he's working on that. And the last one is this Vial of Life residential distribution. What the Vial of Life is picture basically like a big pill bottle, and everybody's medical history is inside the pill bottle. So if they have a do not resuscitate order, if they take certain medications, or if they have any medical information they want you to know and they can't relate to you because they're unconscious, they put it in there and they put it in the refrigerator. So when we arrive on scene, we have a software that allows us to, as we're responding to a house, it'll put a little icon above that house that shows Vial of Life. So our crews, when they get inside, if the person's unconscious, they'll go into the refrigerator, open the door, pull out that and they'll have their health history. So that can help these people receive the care that they need.
That's great.
Yeah, it was a good idea. And I'd love for Derek to be able to toot his own horn, but he's not here. So we'll just briefly go over each of these case studies. Again, this will kind of give you an idea of some of the things that he does versus just, churning out facts and figures. That first case study, we had a patient's mother had called 911 10 times in about a month. And her son was having low blood sugar. So he was getting hypoglycemic, wanting to pass out. Derek arrived, we got a referral from the crews. He educated them on what to do when you have low blood sugar. We actually gave them a glucometer so that the mom could measure her son's low blood sugar. Oftentimes, they're not very receptive to that. You have to really come in with a soft sell initially because they don't know who you are. You knock on their door. Hey, I'm here to have you stop calling 911 so much. It's not going to go over very, very well. So you have to be able to approach it, in a kind way. And he created a relationship with them. And actually help them get some follow-ups to an endocrinologist. And since Derek's interventions, they haven't called 911 anymore. So it went from 10 to 0. He got the education, right, that he needed. This second case study, there was a gentleman, he would drive to station 44 every week, sometimes multiple times a week. He thought he was having a heart attack or a stroke. So they referred Derek to him. He started going to his house, build a relationship with him, found out that it was mainly anxiety induced that was causing him to think he was having these things. He helped him to have a follow-up, helped him schedule a follow-up with his primary care physician and a cardiologist. And then now he's one of Derek's regular wellness visits. He actually goes there and does a 12-lead EKG on him once a month. It kind of helps him to realize he's okay. There's nothing going on. And he hasn't visited the fire station or called 911 since then. And Derek, just continues to follow up on him. So this other one, number 3, you had an elderly lady. She would call 911 every day. Now, sometimes we don't know they're calling 911 every day because sometimes it's just going to police. So police will give us referrals too. She was having hallucinations. Police would come out. There's nothing wrong with her. So they followed up by sending it to Derek. He showed up. Actually, her ring finger was all swollen up. He had to cut her ring off. He gave her a glucometer because she had low blood sugar, same thing. Helped her get a referral to definitive psychiatric care, which is what she needed. She had bigger problems and she lived alone. So what was going to eventually happen to her, right? And so now she's receiving definitive care. This next one it's interesting. We had a citizen that would call 911 every day asking police to bring her a Diet Coke. And this was like every day. We didn't know about it. Eventually, the nice officer that was doing this wasn't on shift. So it got referred to Battalion 4 to bring her a Coke. He called Derek. Derek showed up at her house. He said, I can't give you a Diet Coke. When he found out her health history, he said, I'll give you some water if you want to take your medicine with some water. Helped her out, left. The next day, now she had Derek's phone number, so she called him directly, asked for a Diet Coke. He came back, but he noticed she hadn't moved in 24 hours. She was still in the same position, same spot. So now his radar goes up. There's something wrong. He actually, what happens when you're in the same spot for 24 hours? He cleaned her up. She soiled herself, right? He took care of her. He called her daughter, got her daughter to come down. She flew down within the same week because she's like, this is not normal for my mom. She came down, got her mom the definitive care that she needed. Hasn't called for a Diet Coke since then, hasn't needed help. So, and these last few here, there was case study number 5. There was a crew, that called Derek. What he tries to do too is we'll follow all of our EMS reports. And if a heart attack, maybe a stroke, a major medical call comes out, Derek will automatically follow up on those people. He'll either call them or stop by just to see if they need help or want assistance. That was what this was. There was a serious stroke that happened for one lady. Her family, so he followed up, and it was, it was serious enough that she had to go on hospice. So Derek worked with hospice about what would it mean to fill out a do not resuscitate. What does it mean if we show up on scene and we do CPR, on your family member? That can be traumatic. They talked about all of those end of life issues. I mean, that's heavy for a paramedic, talking about end of life issues with a family. But along with the hospice nurse, they presented all that information. And actually the family asked for Derek to be present when their family member passed away because they had built that relationship together. So to me, that's very impressive. Another one similar to that, we had a longtime patient. So we had been going on this citizen for about a year. She had been getting sicker and sicker. Her husband was blind. Her children obviously were concerned about her. So Derek would stop on a regular basis. Eventually, same thing. It got worse and worse, and she was put in hospice. The hospice nurse, they don't come every day all the time. Sometimes they come just a couple of days a week. So he would still stop in between, brush her teeth, take care of her, right? And until she eventually passed away. Number 7, we had an elderly couple. They would complain of sparking wires in their house. So the engine went out multiple times in a month and they could never find the sparking wires. So they referred Derek. He comes to find out that they were starting to suffer early onset dementia. So he got them referrals that they needed to be able to be taken care of. So now they have proper transport to the doctor, right? They didn't have transportation to get to the doctor. He worked all that out for them. So that family's now taken care of. No need to call 911 anymore. And the last one is brief, but there was, every once in a while, we do get homeless folks in Milton. So there was a homeless couple that was in Milton. We don't have the resources here that they have in Atlanta to handle that sort of stuff. So Derek was able to arrange for transportation down to Atlanta to provide them with, those housing resources and food security resources that we don't have. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of some of the things that he's doing. It's pretty interesting, and he's performing a wonderful service for the citizens. So Chief Ben Musa wanted me to just share this one last slide with you. It just gives you an overview of EMS division, and probably what people think about most with EMS is saves, cardiac saves. What do you do when someone has cardiac arrest within the community? We ran 1,746 EMS calls last year. There was around 3,600 calls total for the fire department. So you split that up among, structure fires, car wrecks, power lines down, all the different things that the fire department goes out to. The vast majority are medical. So to help our fire department with that, we put on 112 hours of in-person classroom training and instruction. And that's taught, in-house to help everybody be able to maintain their certifications. Within the city limits, we responded to 23 cardiac arrests. That's where Milton Fire arrived first and initiated patient care. So with regards to saves on that, there's 2 aspects to saves. One is called ROSC, and that just is an acronym for return of spontaneous circulation. So you don't save a person unless you can get their heart to start beating again. So that's part of a cardiac save. So through cardiac medicine, through our defibrillators that we carry on all of our apparatus, and we have these machines called auto pulses, which it's basically provides mechanical CPR. Between that, we were able to help people achieve ROSC at a 35% rate, which is above the national average of 30%. We had 3 that were discharged from the hospital with favorable neurological survival. That just means they walked out of the hospital fine, right? They go back to their families. And that rate, again, is above the national average, 13% versus 8.4%. But that's because you guys allow us to have tools that work well for the citizens. So we appreciate that, what you do for us. So thank you. But that's pretty much it for For CARES, these are just some of the resources for CARES and also for the EMS division. If you have any questions, I can answer them.
Any questions? It's
Well, it
good
was
stuff.
Very thorough and
Yeah, You're doing
appreciated.
great work.
Thank you. Appreciate your
Mhm.
time.
No, thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Captain.
Yep.
Amy, do we have any public comment on that agenda item?
We do not, sir.
Okay. We will move on to agenda item B, if you could please call that.
B is the overview of the proposed newly adopted Unified Development Code, known as the UDC, and associated text amendments presented by our zoning manager, Ms. Robin McDonald.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be here tonight. And I just want to give a little introduction because Caleb Rasco with TSW, who is our consultant on this project, is going to do the PowerPoint and educate you all everything, hopefully, that you need to know about this project and where we are right now. But I did want to give some kudos to people. It really has taken a village for this project, this document. Many people were involved. That we started in 2017, was put on hold for a while. We restarted it, but especially the last 18 months. Again, a lot of staff people have been helping out incredibly that we couldn't have done it without them. But first of all, Caleb and his group has just gone above and beyond, just constantly. If I call him, he's there. It's just been awesome to be a partner in this. And then just over the last 18 months, Jackie Lim, she worked with me when we first restarted the project. She kind of was the person who headed up the Conveo, which was the software where the public could review the document, and she would collect all the information and put it together and be ready for Planning Commission to talk about. Also, Tracy Wilds, she was there many nights during our regular Planning Commission meetings of review, as well as special work sessions, as well as her incredible talent for reproducing different graphics within the document. Some of them are 25 years old and got pixelated over time. And so she just redid it. So grateful to that. To Emily Schnari, she's been right-hand person to me in this last few months of the project and the Planning Commission, and just again, couldn't do it without her help, as well as Public Works. They have a key portion of this document, and Pond Engineering was a subcontractor, but they did their part, but we really needed our Public Works people to do to review everything, and worked in tandem with community development. So really kudos to them, to especially Sarah and to Rob Del Ross. And lastly, to our city attorney, Paul Fricke, who sat through many, many meetings and listened to what was going on and the edits, but as well as the last couple months doing a line by line review of the document. So that's just, I just wanted to make sure that people were recognized for what an awesome job. Hopefully we can kind of put that on our to-do checklist of items. So with that said, I need to get this up and let's see. Here we go. I will turn it over to Caleb and there.
Thank you very much, Robin, and good evening, Mayor and Council. And before I get started, I also noted that Robin left a very important person off of her kudos, which is herself. In these past couple of weeks where we've been really trying to incorporate all the legal comments and the various comments from city agencies, I can tell you that Robin was working till midnight on Saturday someday to help me get what I needed to get this to you for this council meeting. So again, thank you very much, Robin. And again, I'd like to also thank the larger Milton community. This has truly been one of the most rewarding codes that I have worked on. And I think everyone, both elected officials, planning commission, and various city staff and members of the public have really gotten us to the point where we are this evening. And so what I wanted to do was walk a little bit through the history of how we got here and tell you again why exactly we've been working on what is called the Unified Development Code for 7 years now. And then I wanted to walk through some of the highlights that I think are really useful to the city of Milton going forward. And so in a nutshell, a Unified Development Code is basically a way of organizing the city of Milton's code of ordinances related to development regulations. Like most places, Milton today has zoning, it has subdivision, and then it has assorted development regulations in various parts of the code of ordinances. And, those are written by different people. In the case of Milton, those were written by Fulton County in many cases. And so they're not always as internally consistent and user-friendly as they can be. So Unified Development Code takes all of those various provisions, puts them in a single document, and very importantly, make sure that they're consistent, that the cross-references work, and they're much more user-friendly. In the case of Milton, however, as you'll see in a moment, the proposal before you is both to adopt a Unified Development Code and to amend some parts of the code that we're not changing. But when we take from one area to move it into the UDC, we technically have to amend that older area. So I'll talk about that in a moment. And why would we want a UDC? Well, the big reason is for consistency, right? So you can have everything in a single document. The policy aligns with what the mayor and the city council of Milton want in terms of public policy. The procedures and the permits are all called the same thing in various parts of the code, and the definitions are all aligned. Today, definitions are in various parts of the code of ordinances. There's also a really critical business development reason for a Unified Development Code. There's power in being able to have a one-stop shop for community development, for potential investors, to really know what are all the possible regulations that are going to shape development. You can imagine today, someone might pick up zoning and not realize that there are stormwater provisions that apply, that there are tree ordinance provisions that apply. And this is all in a single document, and it's all very clear that all of the provisions are applicable. And we've also set it up such that when this code is codified, you will be able to click on all the cross references and it'll take you back and forth. So you don't have to look and search. And just again, one of those minor things. And then finally, we've made a really deliberate effort to write this document so that it is much easier to understand than what you have today. We have used the federal plain English writing standards to eliminate as much of the legalese as we can. Where there's a provision that comes from the state of Georgia or where we need to legally establish the code, we've kept that. But for the other language, we've tried to make it easier to understand, which we think is also very, very important. I also wanted to mention that this UDC was one of the priority projects that was in your comprehensive plan. And that, as mentioned before, it is a critical tool. In fact, one of the main tools that the city uses to implement that. So to the point of being able to check the boxes with DCA and really demonstrate that the city of Milton is carrying forward with the recommendations of the comp plan, this is a really important one. And finally, before I talk about the UDC, wanted to mention that part of the reason the city is doing this, right, is that when you were incorporated in 2006, you actually didn't have customized zoning and development regulations that reflected the needs and values of Milton. You adopted what Fulton County had and have been working with that really since that time. Now, the city has made significant updates to that. There were references to get rid of standards that really don't apply in Milton. They might have applied in South Fulton. But generally, there has been no effort to take this whole set of regulations and make them usable and meaningful to the city of Milton until now. So again, I think this is, this is part of the incorporation process, part of becoming and developing and strengthening yourself as a city. So as Robin mentioned, we were brought into the process in 2007. We wrote this Unified Development Code based on the needs of the city of Milton. We had a series of stakeholder interviews. We reviewed all of the various city plans. And then we worked very closely with staff to do a technical review of the codes and regulations. We also did a really neat analysis where we tried to identify if there were certain parts of the code that were getting variances more than others. And unlike many communities, Milton didn't have a lot of quote unquote red flags in that area. You tended to be true to the intent of the ordinance, and there weren't any really glaring areas that stood out, but nevertheless, we went through that process. We also did a technical reading of the ordinances from front to back, and we summarized all of that in what we called the diagnostic report. This is really was our roadmap to the city on how you could move forward with creating a unified development code if you wanted one. Interestingly enough, we knew that as we went through that, there would really be two types of recommendations that could be made. There were a series of what I would call technical cleanups that were only about making the language clearer, making the language more user-friendly, but really didn't change the on-the-ground impact of the regulations. And so we identified a lot of those. Those were things like, using the term community development director consistent. They were using the public works director consistent. They were really more about the language than the regulation. But there were several areas that were policy changes that would be things that really should, in my opinion, come from the city council. And so we met with the council, we had some public meetings, and we determined that for this UDC, for what is before you this evening, we were only going to focus on the technical cleanups. So all of that other stuff that was in there about, maybe creating an equestrian zoning district, or maybe looking at various changes to the code, none of those were in the work that we did at TSW. Those changes, however, have been things that have been important to the city, and the city has been working on through as many as 58 separate text amendments in the past 7 years. So as those amendments have occurred, as council has decided, yes, we want to change the rural Milton standards, or we want to look at this, or we want to update the alcohol ordinances. As those policy changes have occurred, Robin has given them to me, and I have incorporated them into the code. So all of those 58 changes are in what you're reviewing this evening. And as I mentioned, this process has been long and very complicated. We started our agreement in 2017, after council approved the roadmap. We prepared an 80% draft with staff in early 2018. We made a round of technical cleanups. We had a version 1 that was released in 2019, and then the project was put on hold for a couple of years. Well, Kathy Field, as you may remember, she had been here, and then staffing changes. And so it was finally revamped or ramped back up again in May of 2022. And so that's what we have been doing for about, the past year and a half is massaging the code, making sure that it incorporates all the changes. And again, working closely with the city's legal team and with staff to put this document in proper format. So what do we have before you this evening? Well, we have the Unified Development Code, which is organized into 13 articles. The first article is the legal provisions. It's the stuff that we need to have in there in case the city is sued, and we want to make sure that there's severability and to legally adopt the ordinances under state law. There's then a series of several articles that are where we moved the zoning ordinance. Those begin with very general standards, things that apply citywide, and then they go into the zoning districts, into the form-based codes, into the other districts. We then have 3 articles, Articles 9, which is site development, Article 10, which is streets and improvements, and Article 11, which is environment. These are all of the things that are not in zoning today, but are now part of the Unified Development Code. So they're your stormwater ordinances, they're your roadway design standards, they're your soil erosion and sedimentation control ordinances. A lot of the technical ordinances that are currently in the code have been moved to the UDC. And then finally, as you'll see in a moment, we have combined all of the various procedures into a single administrative section that shows what permits people need and who approves them and what is the appeals process. And then finally, a consolidated definition section. So 13 articles, but really came forward from various sections of the code, as you can sort of see before you this evening. They're from chapter 20, which is environment, chapter 48, which is streets and sidewalks, 50, which is subdivision, 54, which is telecommunications, 60, which is tree canopy conservation, and 64, which is zoning. So all of those, with the exception of 48, go into the Unified Development Code. A small portion of 48 goes into the Unified Development Code. The rest remains in 48. So in terms of environment, when you look at the document, you'll see that we have kept most of the names the same. We've just really reorganized how they're formatted, how they're organized into the document. For streets and sidewalks, again, you can look at that section and you can see directly where the provisions have been moved from their current location in 48 to their new location. And again, as I mentioned, some material has to stay in 48, which is why there is a sister ordinance to amend 48 concurrent with adoption of the UDC. Subdivision has completely been moved over. This part of the ordinance is actually in several different parts of the UDC. Anything that is a site standard, meaning how you lay out the development, is under site development. Anything related to the design of roadways is under a new section called streets, where we've combined that with the standards from streets that were in 48. And then anything is about the subdivision process is in Article 12. Telecom was carried over directly into the use ordinances with no changes whatsoever other than the language. And then tree canopy was also carried over. As I mentioned, it is now part of environment. But the bulk of the UDC is zoning, which, as I've mentioned, is in many different places today. And so the final thing that I wanted to talk about before I walk through some of the highlights is that, as Robin mentioned, we've had a lot of people involved in the review of this document. I mentioned that staff has been integral in reviewing from version 0 up through version 3. When we went on hold, we then came back and finished a new version of the Unified Development Code, version 5. And then the Planning Commission actually went through that version 5, literally page by page, from December 2022 through September of 2023. I know Robin attended many meetings. As was mentioned, other city staff attended various meetings. And those were vetted through Robin. I was only given the technical cleanups, so the things like language and terminology, but the Planning Commission did identify several policy questions that I think will eventually come to the mayor and city council at a future point, which Robin and community development is the keeper of. But none of those changes to the actual regulations were incorporated in here. So if the Planning Commission said, we should think about changing the sign ordinance and it's actual to the number or the size of signs, we didn't incorporate that because that's a policy that has to come from the elected bodies. But if they said, maybe this would be better in a table, we did make those changes, just again, to improve the usability. After that, that version that the Planning Commission walked through was also available to the public on the project website. We got several comments there, over several comments, over 1,000 comments, in fact, that staff again reviewed and that shared with me only for technical corrections. And then finally, more recently, we've been going through it again with the engineering staff. Your legal team, Paul, has read the ordinance from front to back just to make sure that everything is absolutely in perfect shape from a legal perspective going forward, especially with some of the, just to make sure that when we change the language, that we didn't change the intent from the legal team's perspective. And so here we are this evening. We are to answer any questions that you may have at the work session, and we hope that the council and mayor will see this document appropriate to approve at the upcoming February 21st meeting. So some very quick highlights. As I mentioned, we've cleaned up the language of the code and the format of the code. I hope you've been able to look at it, and I hope you agree it's a lot easier to understand than what you currently have. Really focused a lot on usability and a lot on clean language. We've created consistent terms. We have clarified language, and we've put everything in a single definitions chapter, which is incredibly important. We've tried to use graphics as much as possible. Some of those were done by my company. This one on the left here illustrates your parking lot tree ordinance requirements. And then, as Robin mentioned, some of the community development staff cleaned up some graphics that we had inherited from Fulton County that were just very, very difficult to read, and did these wonderful graphics on the right here as well. We've used tables, as I mentioned, as much as possible. Before you is the table that talks about the various procedures. So if an applicant comes in and says, I want to get an LDP, what is the process? So you look at this table, you see where the standards for the LDP permit are. You can click on that and go see what the permit requirements are. And then what you see is there's a review by the design review board, and there is a decision by the director of community development, and then there is an appeals process, if appropriate, through the Board of Appeals. So just very, very clear. The other thing that we did here that I think is important is we were aware that the city of Milton was at least contemplating creating some more agricultural districts, perhaps one day. And so while we did not write those in any extent, we did reserve a part of the Unified Development Code for all agricultural districts. So the only thing in there today is AG1, which is your only agricultural district. But if you decide to create new ones, which again, I know has been discussed for several years, they go in here. And then very importantly, the zoning code talks about buffers and setbacks from AG1 districts today. And we've made sure that wherever those exist in the code, it actually says adjacent to agricultural districts. So if you add an AG2 or an AG3, you don't have to amend 400 different parts of the Code of Ordinances. Just a lot easier, a lot easier. Additionally, the zoning districts, as we mentioned, are heavily based on the use of graphics and tables. Every zoning district has a diagram that shows what the lot requirements are. It has an aerial of various parts of the city of Milton that actually have that pattern. So you can see and you can say, hey, I know where that subdivision is. That's one that we're very familiar with. And then everything you need is in a single graphic page versus the stuff on the left, which is what you have today. And then one of the areas I am most proud of, and where quite frankly, we did a lot of work, was cleaning up the city of Milton use definitions and use terms. Your use standards are currently repeated in text in every zoning district. And sometimes they're 98% the same, but they might be a little different in one area. So what we've done here is we read through every single permitted use. We put it into this table. So if you wanted to know what was permitted in various tables in the city, you could review them. And then very important, Milton has a lot of standards that you hold specific uses to. And so what we've done is now, if you, for example, wanted to do a bed and breakfast in an AG1 district, you could look at it, you could look at the table, you could see an AG1 requires a use permit for a bed and breakfast, and then you click on the link and it takes you over to a definition of what a bed and breakfast is and has all of the use standards that council needs to review. Again, these things are currently in your code today, but they're in probably 4 different locations. And so a lot of what we did was just combing through, finding everything, putting it in the same spot. So it's absolutely clear what the use provisions are. Form-based codes have similarly been carried over. The form-based codes did have some definitions that were slightly different from Milton, from the rest of the city. And so we've made sure that we use the same language now. So we don't call it shop in form-based code and retail everywhere else in the city. It's just all retail now. It's trying to make it consistent and user-friendly. We did a significant cleanup in the graphics of your sign ordinances. Today you had some graphics that were really hard to read. We've taken every one of your permitted sign types. We've done a rendering of what the standard is. And then we've incorporated examples from Milton, if possible, and not from Milton if necessary, so that staff and applicants very, very, very clearly know what sign standards are. And so that concludes my presentation. Again, I am personally extremely proud of this. I've been working on it for over 7 years. I think it's something that Milton should be very proud of as well. And I would love to answer any questions that the mayor and council may have.
I have 2 quick questions. One is Planning Commission approved this December 23. Or have there been any changes since then that's being presented to us since the Planning Commission meeting?
The only changes were a series of
Very minor
legal
things
scriveners.
from Legal, and there's
Yeah.
a version, there's a red line version in your packet, which shows the changes that Mr. Fricky made. So.
Okay, and this
we're
doc,
very like, we missed a comma, we missed, very.
We
very
had
minor.
the state OCGA's referenced incorrectly, like I didn't use the right sign and that kind
so
of
when we
thing.
see that red line version, that's the difference from the Planning
Right,
Commission
this
meeting?
from
Okay.
The city attorney,
Okay.
yeah.
Questions from council? And then is this document available right now to the public online?
It, right now is in your packet, but we'll upload it with all the hyperlinks and all that once it's approved.
Okay, and it's scheduled for February 21st, new business?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Tammy, do we have any public comment?
This was on first read, correct?
Yes, it was
Yeah.
the other week,
Yes, we
on
have
the
one.
5th.
Okay, sounds good. Will you please call any other questions? No? Okay.
No, but thank you for your dedication and your enthusiasm.
Yes.
Yep,
Very
Ken?
nice.
My name is Robin. Are we planning on doing a map? Travel with it?
We did not change the zoning map at all.
But
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I'll talk to you about it. Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, please call the first speaker.
Julie Zonner Bailey.
And it is she the only speaker?
BC.
She the only
That's
speaker?
my only one.
Okay, got it. Okay. So it's limited to 2 minutes per person, but it's
Okay.
10 minutes total, so.
I'll be
you-
quick.
Okay, you're the only
Hi,
one.
good
so
evening. My
go
name
for
is
it.
Julie
Yep.
Zonner Bailey, and I live at 255 Hickory Flat Road. I certainly appreciate the presentation this evening. I know that this is it's a big job. What strikes me is that because it's such a big job, how are we handling the potential of something that maybe didn't get caught? Not that you guys aren't perfect, but I don't know that any of us are perfect. And so the magnitude of getting this code converted, what causes me pause, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Gerard, or for you guys just to think about, but is there any language that can be contemplated or included that would address a potential scenario whereby language that they intended, right, with all intention purposes, intended to convert, but somehow didn't get captured? Or maybe there was a policies change that was not intended, that got converted somehow that was unintended. That's, when I'm sitting here, just being honest, I feel like, oh my gosh, I need to read this document page by page, line by line, and I've only got to the 21st of February. I recognize it's been on again, off again, but now it's the real deal. And as somebody who's been intimately involved with a lot of this zoning code, it has me wondering, what can we do legally to make sure that we've got some sort of language that gives you guys a backup plan should something be missed. And I pray that there's nothing that's been missed. And even when, Ken, do you ask about the zoning maps, I think about the sewer maps. I think about the language behind the sewer maps. I think about just all the code. Additionally, I did hear mention of capturing like some future district, some additional future AG1 district. I don't know that we would necessarily automatically presume that those standards would apply because it's something that's not yet contemplated. So there's just a lot around it. I think that there's a lot of good that will and can come from this. I just always would be curious what we're doing to ensure that we don't have any unintended consequences. I appreciate all your hard work. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin, if you could maybe talk about that, because I know Planning Commission, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know we have some new council members, and kind of how it happened was, didn't like each commissioner have like, didn't they each get like a section and they each went
Yes.
line by line?
So our first pass, once Caleb created the version after we restarted the process, it took about 2 or 3 months to come up with the version this would have been 2022. And so what we did was it went to Planning Commission, and we divvied up different articles to different planning commissioners to review. And then we'd come back to a meeting and go over their assignment of what they saw, what needed, changes or edits or whatever. And so we went through the entire UDC. It took us about 5 months or so. And then we were getting ready to push it into the adoption cycle. And then the Planning Commission unanimously voted that they felt like that every planning commissioner needed to look at every single page. So that's when we kind of restarted the review. Again, remember that Paul Fricke was here with the city attorney's office, probably 95% of those meetings, and if not all of them. And so basically it took us almost a year to go page by page, line by line. And then that was finished end of last fall. And then that's when we started the community zoning information meeting. And even during that time, actually, for over a year, it was published online with Conveo, which I mentioned was a software that was available for people just to click on and to make comments or, whatever they wanted to say. And there were over 1,000 comments, and we called through them. We reviewed those comments at the Planning Commission, along with any other things that came up during those reviews. So that is, and then finally, Mr. Fricke reviewed it the last couple months in December and January to finalize. And so that shows what that red line was from the approval of the Planning Commission. Obviously, we have a clean copy, but the red line is really truly only what Mr. Fricke had made in the last go through. So that's the process we went to.
Yeah, I guess as soon as we can get that online for everyone, that'd be great.
Well, I mean, yeah, all of it's online right now under the packet. It's about 2,000. I looked at the packet for at least the first read. If you go to February 5th, it's all there. So
Got it.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, first of all, we have, my office has worked on a handful of these, a conversion from a set of sort of siloed codes into a comprehensive unified development code is the right trajectory. You need to do it. I think Caleb said there's power in that, and he's right. Provides everybody a lot of certainty and fairness as they approach the government. There's a famous quote by a Hollywood director that said, "A movie is never finished, it's simply abandoned." That really doesn't, that was a joke, by the way. It really doesn't, no one, well, that doesn't work here. This isn't abandoned, but I will say to the speaker's comment, which is a good one, the council, as we begin to implement this, as formidable as these efforts are and as good as this team is, and Paul has whispered in my ear, this is as good a process as he has ever been involved in. As many different people looking over the shoulder, doing the red lines, bunch of different folks trying to make sure we captured everything. The council needs to be prepared, however, as this document comes together into sort of a seamless whole, to be flexible, to say, we got to do another amendment. We got to make sure that doesn't quite work the way that's looking. We got to be ready to go on that. And I'll even go further and say, I don't have to tell y'all, but in 2023, the new zoning procedures law kicked in. This was major modifications to the baseline due process requirements for how we take zoning actions and make zoning decisions. I'll tell you, there are a lot of the local zoning bar, myself included, who are working right now on further cleanups to that state law because GASP, clutch your pearls, wait for it, but that state law had some problems too. And so it's got some issues that we think need to be cleaned up. And when it's cleaned up, guess what's going to have to follow those cleanups? Our own code. So we just need to be prepared, as good as I think this is going to be. And this may be one of those rare ones where it's really 100% right off the mark, to still be looking for those unintended consequences, things we just didn't maybe quite capture perfectly, and come back to you.
Okay. And I'm assuming this will take some time. I guess we're going to adopt it, but we're going to have our community applying for permits and stuff.
Oh, yeah, it's never stopped, and they will
Okay.
continue on. It's just a tool that is gonna make
Okay,
it
yeah.
easier. And then, right, we'll have it online,
That was
front
kind
and
of my,
center.
yeah, that was kind of my question. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Any other questions for Ms. Robin?
Robin, just to be clear, and for Ken too, based on what the speaker has said, do you guys have confidence in the conversion from the code to UDC?
100%.
Absolutely.
I mean, again, like, Mr. Gerard had said, that nothing is perfect and there may need to be, amendments, but as far as we consciously is seeing through this process, and maybe Caleb can make a comment because you've done a lot of
Yeah,
UDCs.
so I can tell you how I do it. When we started the process, we downloaded from Unicode, so we had the 100% version of the code at that time. I would set up the UDC, and then as I move over, I literally copy it from Unicode, put it in the location, and I highlight it so I know that I've copied it over in Unicode. So from my perspective, I've done many of these, and we generally haven't lost any code sections. But it's very clear, like if I were to go into that master Unicode document and see that there is an area that's white, it means that I missed it, and there's nothing white in there. So we do have a process down. I will say there was, during the staff review, when I think you may have read the new code and the old code and you had them side by side, we did move some stuff. And so they noticed that a certain line wasn't there. And so I had to go through and say, Robin, it's actually moved over here because we're putting all the fence provisions in the same spot. So
I would lose track. But
I think we've
Caleb
done a
would
really
check
good
on
job at, we've had so many eyes on this and not missing something, but yeah, nobody's perfect. So I will not say that I am. I could have missed it, but we've had Robin, we've had the planning commission, we've had the legal team, we've had a bunch of folks,
Yeah, Public Works.
look at it. So
Thank you.
I think we're good.
Thank y'all. I know it's been a long process. Appreciate it. Okay. With that, we will adjourn into executive session to discuss personnel, land acquisition, and potential litigation. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion to adjourn into executive session.
Second.
All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
I make a motion.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Good night.
Hey,
Good night.